The smell of pine needles and cinnamon still clung to the air that morning when my sister-in-law, Paige Whitmore, smiled at my 12-year-old daughter and handed her a box wrapped in silver paper. It was Christmas, and the house looked like a department store catalog, warm light fake cheer secrets hiding behind every ornament. Melanie tore through the paper delighted, unaware of the cold intent packed inside. When she lifted the lid and saw the sleek white box with the word DNA printed in soft blue letters, Paige clasped her hands together and said almost too sweetly, "Now you can find out where you really come from." The words fell into the room like a glass breaking. My husband Hunter chuckled awkwardly, missing the venom. I didn't. I caught the glint in Paige's eyes, the quiet satisfaction of someone who had waited years to pull the trigger. I managed a polite thank you, my voice steady while my pulse thundered. Inside, a single thought formed sharp and cold. She's trying to destroy my family. After everyone laughed at some joke about ancestry and old secrets, I excused myself to the kitchen. From there, I could still hear their voices light and careless. I leaned against the counter, breathing through the tremor that rose in my throat. For years, I had endured Paige's little cuts disguised as humor, her whispers about how funny it was that Melanie's eyes were almost green while Hunter's were dark brown. I had told myself to ignore her, to be graceful, to keep peace for the family's sake. But the DNA kit wasn't a joke. It was evidence and accusation wrapped as a gift. I looked out the window. The desert dusk outside the Phoenix suburbs was the color of bruised lavender, fading behind the silhouettes of palm trees. Inside the reflection of the glass, my face looked older, tired, like someone who'd been too polite for too long. My hands still smelled faintly of cinnamon sugar from the cookies I had baked for this family. It struck me as cruelly ironic. I was always the one trying to make things sweet. When Paige walked into the kitchen, wineglass in hand, I turned to her. Her smile was soft, rehearsed. "You don't have to look so shocked, Kate. It's just a little science project for the kids." "Is it?" I asked. "Of course. Don't be so sensitive." She laughed a thin sound that carried nothing human. "Who knows, maybe you'll find out Melanie has some Viking blood. Wouldn't that be fun?" I stared at her and said nothing. Silence, I had learned, frightened her more than words. That night, after the guests left and the last candle burned low, I found the DNA box still sitting on the coffee table. Melanie had gone to bed, clutching her new tablet, oblivious. Hunter was loading dishes, humming off-key. I sat down and opened the box again, reading the instructions under the soft hum of the dishwasher. Spit, seal, send. That's simple. Paige's trap was clean and elegant, but traps could be turned. In my notebook, the one where I kept sketches for design projects and lately notes about family interactions, I wrote the date time into short entry. Received gift from Paige. Intent questionable. Possible defamation attempt. The sentence looked absurdly formal, but the act steadied me. Facts would protect me where emotions couldn't. Before going to bed, I stood by Melanie's door and listened to her breathing. She was safe, dreaming untouched by the rot beneath our Christmas lights. I promised myself I would keep it that way. Paige believed she had given me a reason to fear. What she had really done was hand me proof. Outside, a wind picked up, rattling the windows. The night tasted metallic, like the moment before a storm. I knew something irreversible had begun. Paige thought she was starting a scandal. She had started an investigation. The morning after Christmas carried the quiet of aftermath, the kind that follows an explosion no one admits happened. The wrapping paper had been cleared away, the smell of turkey reheated, and yet the tension hummed beneath the surface like an electric current. From the outside, our life looked normal. A suburban house with a sun-bleached lawn, a husband who fixed things on weekends, a daughter who still believed adults meant what they said. But inside the family I married into was an ecosystem of manipulation where silence replaced accountability and affection came with conditions. Hunter's parents, Harold and June, lived 15 minutes away in a gated community that smelled like chlorine and regret. They were the type who believed good manners could disguise rot. Paige was their firstborn, the golden child, the one they described with sentences that began, "She's always been," and ended with excuses. I was the outsider, the woman they tolerated because their son loved me, the one they called dear in a tone that sounded like an apology for my existence. I met Paige 8 years earlier at her own wedding. She was radiant drunk on attention and utterly uninterested in knowing me. When she found out I was a graphic designer, she smiled thinly and said, "So you draw for money." I had laughed back then, thinking she was joking. I don't laugh at her jokes anymore. Paige's relationship with Hunter was parasitic, though neither of them would admit it. He saw her as the fragile sister who needed protection. She saw him as a pawn, proof of her superiority, the brother who worshipped her shadow. For years, I had watched her control him with guilt and half-truths, and I had learned the choreography she provoked. He defended, I endured. The worst part was how ordinary it all looked. Family dinners where every compliment hit a dagger. Birthdays where gifts doubled as reminders of hierarchy. Thanksgiving tables where conversation felt like walking barefoot on glass. I had adapted by building walls inside myself, each one labeled "Don't React." That morning, as I brewed coffee, Hunter joined me in the kitchen, hair still damp from the shower. "You were quiet last night," he said carefully. I handed him his mug. I was thinking. About the DNA kit. About why your sister thought it was appropriate to give it to our daughter. He sighed, the sound of a man exhausted by conflict he didn't have to feel. "She didn't mean anything by it, Kate." "You know, Paige." I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "That's the problem, Hunter." "I do know, Paige." He hesitated, searching for something to say, then looked away. "I just don't want drama." I studied his profile, the man who loved peace so much he mistook cowardice for diplomacy. "Peace built on silence isn't peace," I said softly. He didn't answer. Later, I drove to his parents' house to drop off some leftovers, an excuse to study the battlefield. June greeted me with her usual brittle warmth. "Kate, darling." "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." Paige's perfume lingered in the air, sharp and expensive. I glanced at the mantel where their family photos stood in perfect symmetry. Paige's wedding picture occupied the center. My own photo with Hunter and Melanie was smaller, slightly tilted, as if even in stillness the hierarchy persisted. June chatted about how proud she was of Paige's career at the insurance firm. "She's doing so well, always so responsible." She even thought of giving Melanie something educational for Christmas. So thoughtful of her. I set the container down slowly, forcing my hands not to shake. "Yes," I said. "Thoughtful." In my mind, I replayed Paige's smirk, her deliberate tone. She wasn't thoughtful, she was calculating. Every move she made was a mirror angled to make others question themselves. When I left the Mitchell house, the Arizona sunlight was blinding. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Somewhere behind the manicured hedges, Paige was laughing, telling her version of the story, painting me as paranoid oversensitive. But the truth had a way of surviving distortion. It just needed time and documentation. That night I opened my notebook again. New entry: Paige's behavior consistent with long-term psychological manipulation. Motive: jealousy and control. Evidence: Christmas incident pattern of defamation. I paused, then added one more line. "This time she won't get away with it." Paige's envy was never loud. It was methodical, like a slow leak that ruins a foundation one drop at a time. From the first day I met her, she needed to know what I had, so she could despise it. My job, my marriage, my daughter each became an unspoken competition. She never stopped playing. Hunter used to call it sibling teasing. I called it erosion. Over the years, she'd mastered the art of making cruelty look like curiosity. She'd tilt her head, smile politely, and say things like, "Funny how Melanie doesn't look much like Hunter. Must take after your side." Once during a barbecue, she laughed about eye color, saying genetics could be unpredictable, especially when you don't know all the variables. Everyone laughed, including Hunter, who didn't hear the accusation hiding behind her tone. I did. My silence then was a wound I carried for years. Paige had always lived in the glow of other people's admiration. At her wedding, she had chosen champagne-colored dresses for her bridesmaids, and when I showed up wearing exactly what she requested, she accused me of trying to outshine the bride. I remember the moment clearly, her face stretched in a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. It wasn't about a dress. It was about control. After her marriage, Paige's resentment only deepened. Her husband, Sean Whitmore, was kind, too kind for her. He had a quiet decency that irritated her, and she needed someone else to despise. That someone was me. Her success at the insurance firm became her badge of superiority. Every family gathering turned into a parade of comparisons. If Melanie made honor roll, her son Scott had won a math competition. If I cooked dinner, she'd taste it and murmur, "A bit too much garlic, but nice try." It was a constant test of composure, and for years I passed. But the DNA kit crossed a line. It wasn't just a dig, it was a declaration of war. She had spent years building a subtle campaign, whispering doubts into corners, collecting allies in silence. Her parents believed she was merely concerned. "Paige just worries about you," dear June would say. "She didn't mean anything." The problem with not meaning anything is that it's how abusers justify everything. I started to see patterns I had ignored. Her phone calls after family events, pretending to check in, but really fishing for gossip. Her small compliments followed by corrections. "You look beautiful, but maybe tone down the lipstick next time." Each comment designed to reduce to shrink me into something manageable. What she didn't understand was that I had stopped playing her game long ago. I didn't want her approval. I wanted truth, and truth had patience. That week, as Melanie excitedly talked about mailing her DNA sample, I watched Paige's plan unfold from a distance. She wanted humiliation public and irreversible. I could see it already, a Christmas dinner revelation, her voice pretending shock as she presented results she expected to expose a lie that didn't exist. I wrote another note in my journal that night. Pattern escalation before exposure. Paige will act soon. Prepare countermeasures. Then I stared at the last line, the ink still wet, and whispered to myself, "You've underestimated the wrong woman, Paige." The next day, when I saw her post on social media, "Sometimes the truth needs a little help coming out," I understood the timing. She wasn't patient after all. She was desperate. And desperation, I knew, always leaves fingerprints. The night before the family's post-Christmas dinner, the house felt too still, the kind of quiet that warns you something is coming. The tree lights blinked in soft intervals, washing the walls with fading gold. Hunter sat at the dining table working on his laptop, the glow from the screen casting him in pale blue. I watched him from the doorway, wondering how much longer he could pretend not to see what was happening. When I mentioned that Paige had been calling his mother nonstop, his response was the same dull refrain. "She probably just wants to smooth things over." Smooth things over, those were his favorite words, the balm he used on every open wound. I wanted to tell him that denial wasn't mercy. It was gasoline poured on the wrong fire. But I swallowed it. There was no point arguing with someone addicted to peace. The next evening, we drove to Harold and June's house for dinner. The Mitchell home smelled like cedar polish and control. Paige was already there, radiant in her champagne blouse, arranging wine glasses as if she owned the air. She hugged me too tightly, the kind of embrace that counts ribs. "Kate," she said, her tone dripping with sugary venom, "I hope there are no hard feelings about the DNA kit." "It's all in good fun." "Of course," I said, smiling in a way that felt like holding glass between my teeth. "Science can be fun." She laughed satisfied, and I caught a look pass between her and June, a silent exchange, a nod that meant the performance was underway. Dinner unfolded like theater. Paige dominated conversation, her laughter sharp enough to slice through the hum of small talk. She brought up ancestry again, weaving casual remarks about family resemblance, eye color, and surprises genetics can reveal. Each word was bait, each smile a hook. I kept my tone even, answering politely, my face unreadable. I watched her frustration grow in micro-expressions, the twitch of her jaw, the narrowing of her eyes. She wanted me to crack, to react, to confirm her script of instability. Halfway through dessert, she lifted her glass and said, "Isn't it wild how DNA tests can expose family secrets? I read about a woman who found out her dad wasn't really her dad." The room fell into that taut silence before impact. My fork paused mid-air. Hunter chuckled weakly. "Paige, enough with the DNA stuff." "You're obsessed." Her eyes flicked toward me. "Oh, I just think it's fascinating." I met her gaze and said quietly, "Yes." Especially when people mistake curiosity for cruelty. The sentence hung between us, fragile as glass. Then Harold cleared his throat, changing the subject to sports, but the tension had already seeped into the air like spilled wine. Later in the car, Hunter exhaled heavily. "You didn't have to provoke her." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped pretending she's harmless." Outside the window, the city lights blurred into long streaks of amber. Somewhere in that glow, I felt a shift, small but final. Paige thought she was orchestrating a downfall. She didn't realize she was documenting evidence. That night, I opened my journal again and wrote one line. Tomorrow, the trap resets with her inside it. The next morning, the air was brittle and bright, the kind of winter sunlight that exposes everything. Christmas decorations still hung across the neighborhood, a false promise of harmony. Inside our house, Melanie sat at the kitchen table, carefully reading the instructions from her gift. Her excitement was pure, untouched by suspicion. "Mom, it says I'll get results in about 3 weeks. Isn't that cool?" she said. I smiled for her sake, but the knot in my stomach tightened. "Very cool, honey. Just make sure we do it right." Hunter walked in, coffee in hand, pretending the world hadn't shifted. "You're really letting her do it?" "Of course," I said. "Paige wants a show. We'll give her one." He frowned. "You're overthinking it." "No," I replied, voice calm. "She's overplaying it." That afternoon, while Melanie filled the small tube and sealed the envelope, I documented every step with photographs. Date time method. Evidence. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Paige believed she could weaponize truth, but truth was neutral until someone intelligent directed it. After Melanie ran upstairs, I sat across from Hunter at the table. "Do you really think she's done?" I asked. "You saw her face last night." He rubbed his temples. "I saw my sister being her usual self. Then you didn't look closely enough." His silence said everything. I had married a good man who had been raised to think goodness meant submission. That realization hurt more than Paige's cruelty. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Every motion, the clatter of dishes, the sweep of the floor, was a rehearsal for control. At dusk, I stepped outside, letting the cold air sting my cheeks. The desert sky burned orange, the same hue as tension before a storm. I thought about the years I had spent shrinking to fit into this family, making myself small enough not to threaten Paige's ego. The DNA kit wasn't humiliation, it was liberation. She had given me the perfect reason to stop hiding. That evening, Paige called Hunter. I listened from the kitchen as he answered on speaker. "Just checking in," she said, her tones syrupy. "Hope Kate didn't take my gift the wrong way." "She didn't," he lied, glancing at me. "Good," Paige continued. "You know, sometimes secrets have a funny way of revealing themselves." I read an article. I walked over and pressed the button ending the call. Hunter stared at me. That was rude. That was necessary. I turned away before he could respond, my pulse steady. Rudeness was the language bullies understood best. Late that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in the dim light of my office rereading my journal entries. Each page felt like a fragment of a testimony waiting to be submitted. "Gift presented with malicious intent," one note read. "Behavioral pattern consistent with defamation and emotional harassment." I added a new line. "Counteraction initiated truth as evidence." I placed the DNA test receipt beside the notebook, sealed both in a folder labeled Mitchell v. Whitmore Unfiled. The name was symbolic, but it made my hand stop shaking. When I finally closed my eyes, I saw Paige's smirk, the same one she wore when she handed my daughter that box. Her confidence came from years of getting away with it, from believing no one would ever confront her lies. But she had made a mistake. She had underestimated silence. She thought it meant fear. It meant observation. The next morning, Melanie dropped her sample at the post office, her face bright with pride. "Can I track it online?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "We'll check it together." As she skipped toward the car, I looked at the blue sky reflected on the windshield. The reflection shimmered like cracked glass. Somewhere beneath it, a fracture was growing quiet but unstoppable. Paige thought she had started a rumor. She had started a record. 3 weeks slid by like slow rain on glass. Each day, Melanie checked the tracking page as if waiting for a miracle to arrive in the mail. I watched her excitement with a mixture of love and dread. The test wasn't just data, it was a countdown. Every evening after she went to bed, I reread my notes, cross-checking details, the date the package was sent, the courier, the confirmation email. Paige believed she had started gossip. What she had really started was a paper trail. Hunter avoided the topic completely. When I brought it up, he'd say, Let's just wait for the results. I wanted to shake him and say, it's not about results. It's about intent. But there was no point arguing with someone who thought neutrality was safety. One night, I found myself unable to sleep. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the hallway clock. I sat in the dim kitchen writing by lamplight. Defamation attempt ongoing, I wrote. Subject remains unaware that she has entered a legal framework. Evidence being collected. The words steadied me. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being just a wife defending her family. I was a witness documenting a pattern of abuse disguised as concern. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Melanie burst into my office, tablet in hand, her voice bright. Mom, it says my results are ready. My heart jumped. Wait for Dad, I said. We'll look together. That evening, the three of us gathered at the kitchen table. The air was heavy with the kind of silence that comes before revelation. Melanie clicked the link, scrolling through colorful ancestry charts, reading the percentages out loud like a scientist presenting her findings. Then she reached the section that said parent matches. Father Hunter Mitchell, 50% match. She smiled at him with pride. Told you, Dad. I'm definitely yours. Hunter laughed, his relief so visible it almost hurt to watch. I reached over and touched her shoulder. See? Science can be beautiful when it's used for truth. When Melanie ran upstairs to call her friend, I looked at Hunter. Now we send this to Paige. He hesitated. Let's just leave it. No, I said. We don't leave lies to grow. I took a screenshot of the page and sent it to Paige with a single message. Looks like the data's accurate after all. Merry Christmas. She didn't reply. For 3 days, silence. No texts, no calls, no posts. I imagined her staring at her phone, the satisfaction draining from her face. On the 4th day, a call came not from her, but from Sean. His voice trembled on the line. Kate is... Hunter, home. He's here, I said, handing the phone over. I watched Hunter's expression change as he listened, his brows furrowing, his mouth tightening. When he hung up, he looked at me like someone who'd seen the edge of a cliff. Sean's coming over, he said quietly. It's about the DNA tests. My breath caught. What about them, not ours, he said. Theirs. I knew before he said it out loud that the real explosion hadn't even started yet. 20 minutes later, Sean arrived at our doorstep looking like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, and his hands trembled as he clutched his phone. Hunter let him in without a word. I poured coffee, though I doubted he could drink it. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked on the first syllable. The results came back, he said. For Scott. He paused, swallowing hard. I'm not his father. The words hung there dense and cold. Hunter blinked, stunned. I said nothing. Silence can feel cruel, but sometimes it's the only language that respects truth. Sean set the phone on the table, the DNA report glowing on the screen. Under father, the space was empty. No match, no connection. Just a void. I thought it was a mistake, he whispered. I bought another kit. Tested Chloe, too. His lips trembled. She's not mine either. Hunter's hand went to his mouth. Jesus. Sean gave a hollow laugh that wasn't laughter at all. Yeah, that's what I said. I looked down at the screen. 2 names. 2 children. 0 matches. Behind those numbers lived years of birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, all rewritten in an instant. Paige had built her world on deceit so complete she'd started believing it was truth. Until now. Does she know I asked quietly? I confronted her last night, he said. At first, she claimed the test was wrong. Then, she admitted it. Said she'd been having an affair with someone at work. For years. His voice broke on that word, years. I imagined Paige sitting on their pristine couch feigning regret while calculating how to spin the story. She'd probably cried just enough to appear fragile. But Sean wasn't a fool anymore. What are you going to do? Hunter asked. I filed for divorce this morning, Sean said. And I'm going for custody. They may not be my blood, but they're my kids. I won't let her hurt them the way she hurts everyone else. He rubbed his eyes. I came to tell you because you need to be careful. She's unraveling. She's saying this all started because of you two. Because of the DNA kit. She's telling people you tried to ruin her marriage. I almost laughed at the irony. Paige had fired the first shot, and now she was calling herself the casualty. She can say whatever she wants, I said. This time, her lies come with evidence. When Sean left, I stood by the window watching him drive away. The sun was setting, turning the sky into a smear of rust and violet. Behind me, Hunter exhaled. This is going to destroy her. I turned to him. No, she destroyed herself. We're just watching the wreckage. That night, I wrote in my journal, Truth Revealed. Collateral damage, innocent children. Perpetrator entering denial phase. Next stage, containment. As I closed the notebook, I felt no triumph, only gravity. Paige had wanted to humiliate me publicly. Instead, the universe had given her a mirror. The tragedy was that 2 children had to see their reflection in it too. The next morning began with silence, that strange kind that feels heavy like the air itself knows something irreversible has happened. Hunter barely spoke. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his coffee, spinning the mug slowly between his palms. "She'll call," he said finally. "She always does when she's cornered." He was right. By afternoon, Paige's name lit up his phone. He didn't answer. The call went to voicemail, followed by 3 more. Then a text. "You don't understand. Sean is lying. Please call me." I watched the screen, the words blurry through my fatigue. "Don't respond," I said. "She's my sister." "She's your poison," I replied. Around sunset, another call came, this time from June, their mother. I could hear her voice even before Hunter put the phone on speaker. "Hunter, sweetheart, your sister's devastated. Sean's trying to destroy her reputation. You can't just abandon her like this." "Mom," he said, voice flat. "She cheated for years. He's not destroying her. She did that herself." "Marriage is complicated," June insisted. "People make mistakes." I stepped closer, unable to stay silent. "Mistakes end when the lying does." Paige never stopped. There was a pause, sharp as broken glass. "Kate," June said, tone-clipped, "this is a family matter. You've already caused enough tension." "No," I said softly. "Paige caused it. I'm just refusing to clean up after her anymore." I took the phone and ended the call. Hunter didn't protest. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. That night, rain started a rare desert storm, thin drops striking the windows like small confessions. Around midnight, the doorbell rang. Hunter froze. I knew before he opened it who it would be. Paige stood on the porch, mascara-streaked hair damp from the rain, her breath visible in the cold air. She looked smaller than I remembered, though her rage filled the space between us. "I need to talk to my brother," she said. "You're talking to both of us," I replied. Her eyes snapped to mine. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? You've been turning him against me for years." "No," I said. "You did that yourself. You're ruining my life." Her voice cracked. "You sent those results to Sean. You wanted this." I stepped forward. "I wanted peace." "But peace doesn't live in lies, Paige." She laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "You're enjoying this." "No. But I'm done protecting you." Hunter's voice finally broke through, quiet but firm. "Paige, go home." For a moment, she looked at him and the mask slipped. Behind the anger was pure panic, the kind that comes when control finally dissolves. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Maybe I said, but at least it'll be honest. She turned and left her footsteps splashing down the driveway until they disappeared into the rain. Afterward, the house was silent again. I stood by the window watching the street glisten under the streetlights. I didn't feel victory. I felt the kind of stillness that comes after truth detonates. In my journal, I wrote, "Subject attempted confrontation. Emotional instability confirmed. Event documented verbal escalation threat, implied departure, voluntary." The words steadied me. Paige's storm had begun, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. She had mistaken silence for weakness. She was about to learn what silence sounded like when it testified. In the days that followed, Paige unraveled with precision. First came the silence, then the chaos. She began sending texts, paragraphs that started as apologies and ended as accusations. "You don't understand, Kate," one of them read. "Sean's making things up to turn everyone against me. He's poisoning the kids, too." The irony of that sentence sat heavy in my chest. I didn't respond. The last time I replied to her madness, it had cost me weeks of sleep. Then she started calling Hunter. 10 times a day. When he didn't answer, she called his parents crying about betrayal and a conspiracy. June bought every word. Harold stayed quiet like always, which meant he agreed. That's how this family survived, by pretending conflict didn't exist until someone else bled from it. On the third night, Paige showed up at our house again. She pounded on the door, rain slicking her hair to her face. "You ruined my life," she screamed. "You wanted this." I stepped into the hallway and waited. Hunter opened the door halfway. "Go home, Paige." "He's lying," she cried. "You think Sean's a saint? He's manipulative. He's using the kids to get sympathy, and you're letting him." I came forward, my voice low. "You lied to him for years. You lied to everyone. This is what truth looks like when it finally wakes up." For a second, she froze, her expression empty. Then the fury returned. "You've always hated me." "No," I said. "I just stopped fearing you." Hunter shut the door. Her voice echoed outside, fading into the storm. I stood there listening to the rain until I couldn't hear her anymore. Then I went to my desk and wrote everything down, the time, her words, her state of mind. Evidence. I had learned that truth without proof was just noise. The next morning, Sean called. "She's trying to paint me as abusive," he said, voice cracking. "She's telling people I hit her. I've never even raised my voice to her, Kate." "I know," I said. "Document everything. Every text, every voicemail. She's building a defense. You need to build a case." He exhaled shakily. "Her lawyer's already filed a temporary custody motion. She's claiming I'm unstable." "Then let's give the court a different story," I said. "The real one." That afternoon, I gathered my files, the emails, the messages, the screenshots of Paige's comments over the years. I organized them by date, labeling each folder like a case exhibit. Hunter watched me from the doorway. "You're really doing this," he said quietly. "I'm not starting a fight," I said. "I'm ending a cycle." He nodded but said nothing. Maybe he was realizing how much of our lives had been lived inside Paige's shadow. 2 days later, Sean's lawyer called me directly. Her name was Julia Sanders, sharp voice, calm tone. "Mr. Whitmore says you're willing to testify about Mrs. Whitmore's pattern of behavior." "Yes," I said, "and I have documentation." "Perfect," she replied. Character testimony from a family member carries weight, especially when it contradicts her version. That night, I wrote my final entry for the week subject escalation confirmed. Public narrative manipulation underway. Legal strategy activated. I stared at the words until my eyes burned. Paige had tried to expose me with science. Now science law and her own history would expose her. She believed she was the victim of betrayal. She was really the author of consequence. When I turned off the light, the house felt lighter. Outside, the rain had stopped and the air smelled clean. There's always that strange peace after destruction, the stillness where truth finally breathes. Paige mistook that silence for victory once. She wouldn't again. The legal domino began quietly, the way most disasters do. Sean filed for divorce, and within days, Paige retaliated with filings of her own claims of emotional abuse. Accusations of financial manipulation, lies printed neatly on court documents. Her lawyer painted her as a heartbroken mother betrayed by a vindictive husband. Reading her statement felt like watching a play where every actor had been replaced by a stranger wearing your skin. Julia, Sean's attorney, called me one evening. "We'll need your testimony," she said, "and anything you can provide about her past behavior. Texts, emails, recordings, especially evidence of her targeting you and your daughter." I had plenty. I spent hours printing everything I'd archived, screenshots of her messages about Melanie's eyes, the dinner conversations I'd transcribed word for word, photos of the DNA kit from Christmas morning. Each page was a brick in a wall I hadn't realized I'd been building for years. When I was done, I slipped everything into a binder labeled Exhibit C, Pattern of Defamation. Hunter flipped through the pages that night, his face pale. I can't believe she wrote some of this. You believed it when she said it, I reminded him. You just didn't want to admit what it was. His silence told me he understood now. The first hearing was set for February. Paige arrived in a beige suit, her hair, perfect eyes, swollen just enough to suggest sleeplessness. She carried a tissue in one hand, a performance prop. Sean looked hollow but composed, the quiet strength of a man who'd lost everything except dignity. I sat in the back row beside Julia, my binder in my lap, like a weapon made of truth. Paige testified first, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. I've made mistakes, she said, but I love my children. Sean's trying to punish me. He's turning everyone against me, including my brother and his wife. Her lawyer nodded solemnly. Mrs. Whitmore, do you believe you've been the victim of character defamation? Absolutely, she said. Especially by Kate Mitchell. My name echoed through the courtroom like a dropped stone. Julia leaned forward. Perfect, she whispered. She opened the door. When it was Sean's turn, Julia presented the DNA results, the financial records, the text messages. She moved like a surgeon, cutting through Paige's story with precision. Paige's face stayed frozen, but her eyes flickered each time another piece of evidence landed. After the hearing, Julia turned to me. Your testimony will come next session. You'll corroborate the pattern of deceit. We'll also address the morality clause in her family trust. Your father-in-law confirmed its existence. He won't enforce it, I said. He never stands up to her. Then we'll remind him that fiduciary duty isn't optional, she replied, smiling slightly. That night back home, I opened my journal. Phase 2. Exposure through legal system. Subject continues performance under oath. Emotional instability visible. Public image deteriorating. I closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling. I had expected satisfaction, but all I felt was exhaustion. Truth wasn't a triumph, it was a labor. Yet I knew this labor mattered. Every word, every document, every sleepless night had been part of building something incorruptible, a record that would outlive her lies. The courtroom was colder than I expected, its fluorescent lights stripping everyone of warmth and pretense. I sat at the witness bench, hands folded around a notebook that had become my shield. Paige entered 10 minutes late, her heels echoing against the tile like a warning. She wore a soft gray suit and carried the look of someone rehearsed fragile but defiant. I'd seen her practice that expression for years in mirrors. Julia called the case forward. Her tone was calm, surgical. Your Honor, this case concerns not only custody, but the pattern of deception that undermined the very foundation of this family. She laid the DNA reports before the judge. Each page turned like a blade. Paige's lawyer objected to the relevance, claiming the tests were personal matters, but the judge motioned for Julia to continue. Sean took the stand first. He spoke quietly, voice steady, except when describing the night he found out. I looked at the results, he said, and realized I'd been living in someone else's version of the truth. He described years of raising children who weren't biologically his, the birthdays, the bedtime stories. The courtroom remained silent, except for the rustle of papers. When Julia asked what he wanted from the court, his answer was simple. A stable home for them. Somewhere built on honesty. Then it was Paige's turn. She took the oath with shaking hands, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. I made mistakes, she said, but Sean is vindictive. He's using this to destroy me. Her lawyer guided her gently, each question designed to rebuild her image until Julia stood up for cross-examination. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, how long did your affair last? Paige hesitated. A few years. A few, or more than 5, maybe 5. And during that time you allowed your husband to believe the children were his. Paige's voice dropped. I didn't want to hurt him, but you did. For years. Isn't that true? Paige glanced toward me, eyes full of something venomous and desperate. This is what she wanted, she said suddenly, pointing in my direction. Kate planned all this. She hates me. She started it. The judge frowned. Mrs. Whitmore addressed the court, not your sister-in-law. Julia waited, expression unreadable. So, to be clear, she said you're admitting you had a sustained affair and concealed it, but you're blaming Mrs. Mitchell for your exposure. Paige's silence was louder than any confession. When my name was called, I stood the sound of my heels steady against the floor. Julia asked me to describe Paige's behavior. Manipulative, I said. She hides cruelty under charm. The DNA kit she gave my daughter was meant to humiliate me. And did it succeed? I met Paige's eyes. No, it revealed her instead. When the judge finally adjourned, the room exhaled. Sean sat still, eyes closed. Paige stared at the table, the tissue in her hand shredded. Truth had taken everything from her, but it had done so fairly. The hearing stretched into its second day, and by the time the morning sun spilled across the courthouse steps, Paige's performance had begun to fray. Her voice, once smooth with self-pity, cracked under the weight of facts she couldn't bend. Each question from Julia pressed deeper, stripping away the illusions she'd built her life upon. When the judge called for a recess, Paige sat motionless, her lawyer whispering frantically beside her. Julia turned to me as we stepped into the hallway. "The morality clause," she said quietly. "Your father-in-law's the trustee, right?" I nodded. "He'll try to protect her." "Not if we remind him that trust law doesn't care about family feelings," she replied. That night back home, Hunter sat on the couch, his head in his hands. "I never thought it would come to this," he murmured. "She's my sister." "She stopped being a sister when she started being a threat," I said gently. "You can love someone and still hold them accountable." I pulled out the old trust paperwork I'd found years ago when Harold had boasted about the family's future security. Each grandchild, each sibling, each child listed as a beneficiary with a clear clause about moral conduct. I'd highlighted one line: "Any act of adultery or moral turpitude shall result in immediate forfeiture of benefits." The ink was old, the language archaic, but binding. The next morning, I took the document to our attorney for verification. He flipped through it, nodding slowly. "It's enforceable," he said. "Your father-in-law has no discretion. If she committed adultery, she's disqualified. So, if he ignores it," I asked, "then you petition the court to remove him as trustee for breach of fiduciary duty." The words were clinical, but I felt their gravity. Paige's lies had burned everything in their path: her marriage, her children's stability, and now the one thing she valued most, money. That afternoon, I called Harold. My voice was calm, detached, the way one speaks to a man who's spent a lifetime mistaking cowardice for diplomacy. "Paige violated the morality clause," I said. "You know what that means." He stammered. "Kate, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I interrupted. "If you don't enforce it, you'll be complicit. I'll have no choice but to make it public." The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear his breathing falter. Finally, he said, "I'll review it." 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived addressed to Paige. I didn't have to open it to know what it said, but I did anyway. "Notification of beneficiary removal due to breach of moral conduct. Signed, Harold Mitchell." I folded the letter neatly and set it beside my journal. In my notes, I wrote, "Clause executed. Justice formalized." That night, Hunter watched me from across the room. "You threatened my father," he said softly. "No," I answered. I reminded him what integrity looks like. Outside, the desert wind rattled against the windows, a dry whisper of finality. Paige had always believed the world would bend around her charm, but laws didn't bend, and neither did truth. The judge's final ruling came on a Thursday morning so bright it almost felt cruel. Paige lost primary custody. Sean was granted full guardianship of both Scott and Chloe. Her visits would be supervised twice a week at a family resource center until further notice. When the decision was read aloud, she didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her knuckles white against the edge of the table, the last fragments of her composure cracking beneath the weight of the verdict. Outside the courthouse, Sean hugged Julia, his lawyer, and then turned to me. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," I replied. "You showed up for your kids." Behind us, Paige stormed out with her attorney, her voice low and furious. "This isn't over," she hissed as she passed. But her eyes told a different story, one of exhaustion, disbelief, and the dawning awareness that her lies had stopped working. Later that evening, June called. Her voice shook with emotion. "She's devastated, Kate. She lost everything." "How can you just sit there and let this happen?" "She let it happen," I said evenly. "We just stopped pretending she was innocent. "You're heartless," June whispered. "No," I answered. "I'm just finished cleaning up her mess." She hung up. That was the last time we spoke. Hunter listened to the call from the kitchen. When I turned around, he looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You're stronger than I ever realized." "No," I said quietly. I just stopped confusing silence with kindness. The news spread quickly through the family. Some sided with Paige mostly out of habit. Others stayed neutral, pretending objectivity made them moral. But truth has a way of dividing people. It forces them to choose between comfort and conscience. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about the children. Scott was 13, Chloe only 7. Their world had been split open by adult deceit. The thought of them sitting in a sterile visitation room while their mother rehearsed another version of the past broke something inside me. I knew justice mattered, but it rarely felt clean. I drove to Sean's house the following weekend. The kids were in the backyard throwing a ball under the warm Arizona sun. They laughed an unfamiliar sound like the house was learning to breathe again. Sean joined me on the porch. "They're adjusting," he said. "Therapy helps." I nodded. "They'll heal. They have someone who tells them the truth." He looked down. "And what about Paige?" I stared at the horizon. The sun was setting long orange light spilling across the sand. "She'll have to live with the one thing she can't manipulate," I said. Consequences. That night I added the final note to my journal for the case custody granted. Trust executed. Subject's downfall complete. Emotional recovery ongoing for collateral parties. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, the quiet kind justice brings when it finally stops whispering and starts existing. The weeks that followed the ruling felt like standing in the aftermath of an explosion, quiet, smoke-filled, but finally honest. Paige disappeared from public view. Her social media accounts went private. Her friends, the ones who once laughed at her dinner parties and shared her filtered photos, stopped calling. She'd gone from center of attention to whispered cautionary tale. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the court, a formal notice confirming the redistribution of the family trust. Half to Hunter, half to his younger brother. I placed it on the counter beside a vase of wilting lilies. The universe had a strange sense of symmetry. That night, Hunter stared at the letter for a long time before saying, "I thought this would feel better." "It's not supposed to feel good," I said. "It's supposed to feel fair." He nodded slowly as if testing the word on his tongue. Fair. A word his family had used so often yet never practiced. Sean visited a few days later. The exhaustion around his eyes had softened into peace. Scott and Chloe were adjusting to the new routine therapy, helping them untangle the knots their mother had tied. "They still ask about her," he said quietly. "I tell them she loves them but needs help." "That's kind," I replied. "Kinder than she ever was to you." He smiled faintly. "Karma did the rest." "Yes," I said. "But karma doesn't always come alone. Sometimes it needs witnesses." After he left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. The light was gold and gray, beauty mixed with residue. In my lap lay the journal I'd kept since Christmas. The first page had been written in fear. The last page, I realized, would be written in peace. I opened to the final entry and began to write. Case closed. Subject removed from trust. Custody stabilized. Emotional equilibrium restored. Lesson truth requires patience, not anger. I paused, then added another line beneath it. Justice isn't loud, it's deliberate. For the first time in months, I felt no tremor in my hand as I closed the notebook. Paige's last message arrived a week later. It came through email, unsigned but unmistakable. "You think you've won. But you'll regret crossing me." I stared at the words, then hit archive. Some wars didn't need responding to. Some victories existed in silence. On Christmas Day, exactly 1 year after the first gift was unwrapped, we hosted dinner again. Sean and the kids came bringing laughter and noise. Hunter carved the turkey while Melanie helped Scott set the table. Chloe handed me a handmade ornament shaped like a heart. "Dad says this year is about rebuilding," she said shyly. "It is," I replied, hanging it on the tree. As the house filled with warmth and candlelight, I looked around and thought how different peace looked from perfection. It wasn't flawless, it was earned. Outside, the wind shifted through the desert, carrying with it a faint echo of the past, but it no longer belonged here. Justice had moved in, and for the first time it felt like home. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of my daughter's science fair watching her adjust a small solar-powered model with quiet focus. The gym was full of parents taking photos, children laughing, teachers clapping politely, but all I could hear was Melanie's steady breathing, calm and sure. She caught me watching and smiled the kind of smile that told me she'd inherited resilience, not fear. That night after the fair, we drove home under a violet sky. Hunter was quiet beside me, his hand resting lightly on my knee. "It feels like a lifetime ago," he said. "The Christmas. The chaos." "It was," I replied. "We just lived every minute of it." He nodded. "You ever think about her, Paige?" I exhaled slowly. "Sometimes, not out of anger anymore, out of recognition. She taught me what I'll never become." When we got home, the house was glowing with soft lamplight, the air warm with the smell of cinnamon and cedar. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated mostly by Melanie's handmade ornaments. On top hung a paper star, uneven but proud. I sat down at my desk, opened the journal I hadn't touched in months. The pages smelled faintly of ink and rain, time-stamped with my own transformation. I began writing again, not as a record, but as closure. Final entry I wrote. Subject of investigation has ceased communication. Legal processes complete. Children adapting. Emotional recovery achieved. Case file archived. I paused, then continued in smaller handwriting, more personal. I used to think justice was punishment. It isn't. It's the moment you stop letting someone rewrite your story. The wind rattled faintly outside. Somewhere beyond our street life was happening, messy, relentless, unpredictable. I thought about Paige's last message, the one she'd sent before disappearing completely. I never replied. Some ghosts stay quiet when you stop feeding them. A month ago, I'd heard through an old neighbor that she'd moved out of state. Rumor said she was working part-time, living alone. I didn't wish her suffering. I wished her accountability. That's the thing about karma, it doesn't destroy you. It teaches you. And the lesson is always expensive. I flipped through the old pages, my notes, my fears, my evidence, and realized something had shifted. These weren't just documents of survival, they were proof of evolution, of who I'd become while standing in the wreckage of someone else's lies. Melanie came into the room, then barefoot, holding a mug of cocoa. "Mom," she said softly, "you coming to watch a movie?" I closed the journal. "In a minute." "You're writing again," she noticed. "Just finishing something I said, not ending. Finishing." She nodded, wise beyond her years, and went to the living room. When I joined them, Hunter had already started the movie. The light from the screen flickered across his face, and for a moment I saw the boyish ease he'd lost somewhere between loyalty and truth. He looked at me, smiled. "We made it," he said. "We did," I answered. As the opening credits rolled, I leaned back, listening to the laughter of my daughter and the hum of peace filling our home. The war had ended long ago, but its echoes had built something unbreakable clarity. I had learned that love isn't about defending someone's cruelty. It's about defending the truth that survives it. And as I closed my eyes, I felt it, the weight, lift the world right itself, and justice breathe quietly, like forgiveness.